Merci de votre introduction et merci aussi pour votre invitation. Je suis très honorée d'être ici et de pouvoir partager la joie de vos 25 ans sur la brèche. Je sais très bien que ça, ce n'est pas facile. Avant de commencer, je voudrais m'excuser de n'avoir pas osé faire cette présentation en français, bien que le français a été ma première langue étrangère. Cependant, je serai prête à accepter vos commentaires et répondre à vos questions en français après la présentation et aussi pendant les coffee break et le lunch break. So, back to English. In this session, I will address what I promised in the title, but I have to confess that while preparing it, I've been trying to find answers to two questions that have worried me for some time now. And I think that these two questions have an impact on the success of language education programs today. The first question is, why is assessment always a problem? It's a problem for students, for politicians, for parents, for teachers, for the society in general. We talk about the number of assessments, the difference between assessment and testing. In English, we are happy to have so many words for assessment, evaluation, testing. In French, you have certification, évaluation, et vous utilisez aussi le testing. En espagnol et en catalan, c'est plus difficile. Nous avons évaluation, ça y est. So, this is a problem. Assessment is often a problem. Many teachers say, I'm a teacher, I'm a pedagogue, I'm not a tester. As if assessing was not part of teaching and learning. And the second question is, why is the CFR, le cadre, more claimed than really used? We talk about CFR levels, CFR level labels all the time, and there was a renewed interest in the CFR with the publication of the new descriptors and the new scales in the companion volume. But it seems to be dying down, this new interest. We talked about mediation, we talked about the new scales on plurilingualism, which are not just an addition to what we had in 2001, but it seems as if there's less and less interest in that. And I think that transparency and coherence, or lack of them, has something to do with that, with how assessment is seen as a problem and why the CFR is claimed rather than really used. These are the challenges that I will address today, and that's why I will open the lens and start by talking about language education and the key elements in language education, and the three elements that constitute language education: curricula, teaching and learning, delivery, and assessment. I hope that you will allow me then to take down memory lane for a while to the early 1990s, when Europe decided that le cadre was necessary, and the project led to the publication in 2001 of the Common European Framework of Reference, precisely when the CLES was born 25 years ago. 25 years ago since the publication of the CFR. And then I'll talk about the publication of the companion volume in 2020. This will lead me to describe the reasons why the handbook was developed. The handbook for aligning language education to the CFR, and what alignment means and what it requires from those embarking on aligning their language education programs to the CFR or to any set of standards. This, I will describe why the handbook was developed, and then I will only briefly tiptoe on two issues that will be dealt with during the conference: artificial intelligence and ethical challenges, where Dr. Clétardio will talk about that tomorrow morning. So I'll sort of tiptoe on these, and I will not provide a conclusion, but rather some suggestions on how to proceed when embarking on an alignment project, which I hope will be perceived as useful and may contribute to the discussion during the breaks and during the roundtables. So let's start. What's language education? If you search in Wikipedia, language education talks about 4 main learning categories, basically related to how you describe language, whether it's an action-oriented approach or whether it's another language model that you use. You talk about competencies, proficiencies, experiences, and multiple literacies. Yeah? So you go from language description to a bit of, talking about the learner already. Whereas David Little and Gudrun Eriksson, colleagues of mine, they talk about education in general as a process of people shaping designed to help learners extend and perhaps in some ways modify their identity while exploiting and developing their agency. One of the topics and terms that was very much in some time ago and which seems to have disappeared these days. So, language education defined, curriculum. We talk about curriculum all the time, and Ralph Tyler talked about curriculum in a general term, talking about basically the what, appropriate learning objectives, the how, useful learning experiences, and organizing learning experiences, and then the how well, the what, the how, and the how well, talking about evaluating the curriculum, etc. So he did talk about learners, but the researcher who talked even more about learners was Leo van Leer in his Authenticity in the Language Curriculum book, which has been a bit forgotten, but which I like a lot. And he talked about a triad. And the triad for the learner was to be aware, to engage with authentic materials and situations, and to be autonomous. And if the learner achieved all this, the learner had a feeling of knowing. And that was key. But then he talked about another triad, which many people forgot, which was assessment, accountability, and achievement. And he talked about triads because they all start with A, which is difficult when you translate it. But he talked about achievement, being able to see what you can do, being able to assess what you can, to have responses from what you can do. It's not only your feeling of knowing, it's your knowledge of success, and then accountability. Yeah, being responsible for your own learning, but those responsible for assessment also being responsible to respect the learner and the test taker, etc. And when I revisited Leo van Leer's work in 2017, I did find that we should be able to identify assessment as the relationship between the learner's feeling of knowing and the knowledge of success that any assessment provides. Assessment understood in the widest possible sense. We talked about curriculum. Now, teaching and learning, also in the handbook that Anik referred to, the handbook for aligning language education to the CFR, we talk about delivery, teaching and learning. And any classroom has all these elements around. You have the contextual dimension, you have the affective dimension, the interactive dimension, instructional, learning, proficiency, elicitation. You go from learning to teaching, how people learn, what they are taught, and how they are assessed. This sort of description was developed in a way, or identified by Caroline Turner and Jim Purpura when they were working, when they are still working on that, on learning-oriented assessment and understanding that assessment is something which is, why can't you see it? Sorry. It hasn't changed. Very strange. It hasn't changed. 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 let's start clearly that assessment is necessary. We never know what students learned. We know what we teach, but we don't know whether what we teach is what they learn. You think you're teaching something, and they think you're teaching something else. So you need to assess. You need to assess what they understand that you're teaching, either by looking at them, observing your students, giving them a piece of homework, asking questions, whatever, or giving them a test. So this is necessary. And assessment the assessment universe is diverse. It's not only the classroom that is diverse, but the classroom and all the elements around the classroom, the teaching and learning universe, are related in circles. And we teachers, the bottom line is that we're all teachers, have to try and reconcile the inner circle with the outer circle. And that's not easy. We need to wear lots of hats, but we need to reconcile the classroom, the user, the learner, all the elements that constitute what is called assessment for learning, to international language tests, which should also respond to the assessment for learning criteria. So, in this context, this is the core of what Turner and Perpera talked about when they were talking about learning-oriented assessment, trying to find a way to take all these elements into your assessment. And that's something that Professor Tardieu will be talking about tomorrow. That's what you promised, roughly. So I'm not going to deal too much about that. And this is what produces the problem. And because there's tensions, it's very difficult to find flow between the assessment in the classroom and the international assessments, or the CLES assessments, which are, the outside. And there's always difficulty. We used to label these tensions as the reliability and the validity debate. But they are more complex because we will want something that reflects the globality of what we do, the internationalization, the portability, common standards, new meaning innovative, respecting standards, vertical, one way, correct, incorrect, related to policy, and it's normally perceived as top-down. Yeah? Somebody decides to have a test, and this test needs to be good for everybody. One size fits all. And this enters into tensions, because then we argue for Mr. Diversity, local, diverse, old concepts. No matter how modern your test is, it may or may not relate to how the teaching learning process is organized in the classroom. So that's normally a tension. Horizontal, taking into account the diversity in your classrooms, and bottom up, coming from the bottom up. So there are extreme differences, and CLES exams are trying to bridge it. I've studied a bit the way your exams have been designed, and I think there's a way of bridging both, but there's always tensions. And I want to quote Ms. Levet, who says, "Why is assessment a problem?" And I think that he's very right. The growing gap between the understanding of learning and the practices of assessment. I'm not going to deal much into it, but we have changed a lot the way we understand how learning happens. And then the most successfully growing international certificate is Duolingo, which is very difficult to match with how we understand learning. But it's also efficient because there's a lot of research, but I'm not going to go into this. But that was an illustration of what this means, I think. And supporting learning in an incredibly diverse student population. I'll go back to that later on. Developing and using assessments for different purposes that are consistent with learning goals and not inconsistent with one another. And leveraging technology to carry out assessment with new forms and purposes, better adaptations to students, etc. So in 2018, Professor Mislevy was actually quite modern. This is the introduction, to language education and the conflict between teaching, learning, assessment, which is, surprise, surprise, the subtitle of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, Assessment. Let's go back to where we are now and where we come from. In 2001, because in the 1990s, there was already the feeling that something was not working in language education in Europe. The CFR was published to promote, to provide, and to assist, and to contribute to the planning of language learning programs, the planning of language certifications, and the planning of self-directed learning. Not different from what Ralph Tyler was talking about, not different from what Leo van Leer was talking about. All the time I'll be going backwards and forwards to things that we think are new, but which really have been there worrying us for quite a number of years. The framework was attempted to be comprehensive, transparent, and coherent. And that's the news today. This is not new in the 2020 volume, companion volume. This was already in the 2001 draft. I had the privilege and torture to read the first draft of the CFR in 1996, and that was there. It was dropped later, but also in the 1996 version of the CFR, the scales were just an appendix. And everybody who wrote the 5 pages feedback that we were requested to write recommended to put them in. So they put in the scales, and they had to take out other things. One of them was this. So this idea, the Common European Framework in 2001 already talked about modes of communication. There were no skills. They talk about language activities, not language skills. And we still talk about language skills. And I've been involved in projects in different places in the world until very recently, where I said, let's not talk about listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Let's talk about reception, production, interaction, and mediation. No, this is not what teachers expect. Yeah? So that was 2001. Very modern already. Well, the meaning of modern can be questioned. And then in 2016, we started thinking about supplementing the 2001 volume with the same objectives, the promotion of plurilingualism, pluriculturalism, and insisting on the fact that the concept is the same. The 2020 adds a lot of things, but retains the same crucial meaning: facilitate transparency and coherence between the curriculum, teaching and assessment within an institution, and transparency and coherence between institutions, educational sectors, regions, and countries. So I'll just stop for 1 minute and ask you to ask yourselves how happy you are with this, with the transparency and coherence in your context between the curriculum, the teaching, and the assessment. Okay, enough. I wasn't happy, And some colleagues of mine were not happy either in 2020 when the companion volume was published. And we thought that things would not be getting better because the companion volume clarified some things, but it was longer than the CFR 2001. And if, in case we were not frightened enough by around 50 scales already existing, we had 35 scales more. So instead of having to cope with 50, we had to cope with 80. And we started worrying. And those people worrying was me and 5 other colleagues, Barry O'Sullivan, David Little, Linda Taylor, and Nick Saville. And we decided to publish something that would help. First, we thought of helping testers, because the manual had been published in 2009, and then the Council of Europe insisted on the fact that the CFR was used mainly in assessment and not as much in the classrooms. So they refused point blank to update the manual or talk about assessment, testing and tests. And we testers started thinking how we could help all the institutions that had embarked in aligning their tests to the CFR to update them and relate them to the companion volume. But then, talking and talking with colleagues, we found out that we needed to go beyond testing into assessment and also into learning and teaching and curriculum development. And that's why David Little got on board, and we started thinking of updating this that many of you will be familiar with, which is the specification, standardization, and validation plus familiarization structure of the manual to the alignment handbook. I take the opportunity to ask you to engage in the translation of the document into French. This was done with artificial intelligence, sorry. But please engage in the translation of the document into French. It's already been translated into German and into Spanish. It's currently being translated into Turkish and into Greek. So let me know or write to me a mail if you want to translate it into French, and I'll send you the very, very simple guidelines that we've put together. Why did we publish this? Because we thought that the CFR plus the CFR companion volume were too much, and we thought that this could be an excuse to get talking again about the importance of language education as an ensemble of 3 elements: learning, teaching, and assessment. We thought that it had to be easy to use for different users in different contexts, with different needs and with different available resources. And we were worried about its impact, its being practical, short, simple, and with examples. We didn't reach the example phase yet, but we're getting there. The structure is very similar. By the way, you can download this document from the website, because one of the new things, the fantastic thing that happened with this document, is that for the first time it was published by professionals, not by an institution, but the institutions that these professionals worked with. For example, it was the first time that EALTA, ALTE, UCALTA, and the British Council worked together for free and published online a document that is available to whoever wants to use it. So if you click on the EALTA website or the ALTE website or the British Council website, the UCALTA website, and the Council of Europe, who's been very supportive, the Council of Europe also has it in its website, and the ECML, which is the graph thing as well. So we wanted to follow, as it were, the frame that we followed with the manual for relating exams to the CEFR, but we sort of simplified it because we could see that we couldn't really change it, because it's key that first first of all comes the what, and the what is the familiarization. And the familiarization is with the CFR, but also with any know-how that is involved in methodology, in curriculum development, in drafting objectives, etc. And then it goes to the how, specification, standardization, standard setting, and validation. And one of the key things in this volume is that Barry O'Sullivan actually went back to Ralph Tyler. I don't think he says so, but it comes from there. And the handbook talks about the comprehensive learning system, a triangle that includes curriculum, assessment, and delivery. Delivery is what I've been referring to as teaching and learning so far. And if you talk about curriculum, that's what we understand by curriculum. This is what we understand by delivery. Includes, it's a wider element, teacher education, materials, and the physical space, and assessment. But aligning these three elements, as I'm sure that you know, is not easy or straightforward, because it's not easy to talk to the curriculum developers, or it's not easy to talk to teachers, and it's not always easy to adapt a classroom of 15 or 20 or 30 to the diverse complexity of the many students you may have. And there's a lot of challenges in alignment in language education. The first one is that very often a new or revised curriculum is introduced, but the teachers have no adequate training. Or they have training and they go back to the classroom and use the textbook. And the textbooks are distributed all over the world, where they may be different curricula or different learning orientations. The approach actionnel is understood by different people in different ways. So the benefits intended by the curriculum may not be realized. Then the assessment does not fit with the requirements of the curriculum. It's focused on 4 skills, but the assessment is multiple choice grammar and reading. Here I want to say that I think that multiple choice questions are useful if they are good. The problem is that it's so difficult to develop multiple choice questions that they are always lousy. And because they are not good, they are stupid. And because they are stupid, they're not valid. And because they're not valid, they're not reliable. So that's life. Yeah? The textbooks and materials used in the classroom do not reflect the requirements of the curriculum. And the curriculum, teacher training, and assessment are well aligned, but the structure of the classroom makes effective delivery difficult or impossible. The furniture is fixed to the floor. Yeah? So these are some issues that make alignment difficult. And I'll show you why alignment is so important. You all have a car, don't you? Well, if you don't have a car, when you get a car, this is the description that the mechanic will give you. The wheels in the car are very important. I learned about this because my son is an engineer, and he did his PhD on how to simplify the research on which wheels are best for which car. So not all the cars can have any type of wheel, and there's a lot of practice behind this. So maybe in order to have the proper alignment and the proper wheels, you may need to use, 20, 50, 70 sets of wheels, because they need to run for kilometers and kilometers to see if the car is stable or not. So remember this, when you think about alignment, it may be very abstract for some people, but think of the importance of having the wheels in place. If one wheel is not working, then your car will end up being damaged. The engine will eventually be damaged. So alignment is important. And why is it important to align to the CFR? Because it contributes to coherence, to transparency, to quality, and to accountability. You know what you're talking about. We were discussing this with Claude Springer just a minute ago. When we talked, everybody was talking about, is my B1 like your B1? Is my B1 like your B1? Until we realized that this was not the right question. The right question is, what's your B1 like? Tell me about your B1, and then I'll see. And tell me how and why. Why you call it's a B1? Show me the money. Huh? Why is this a B1? Oh, well, yeah, you're right. Your B1 is different from my B1, but they match the same standards, and the how may be different, but the what is exactly the same, and you've proved it, and it's valid. So, the alignment in the 2022, a colleague talked about the Tin Man in the yellow brick road in Judy Garland's film. Remember that during the film, he hasn't got a heart, and in the end, he does have a heart. So in this triangle, there is a heart, and this is the CFR. You could have any other heart. Yeah, in Canada, they have another heart, and they have a very fantastic developed curriculum with another heart, which is not the CFR, it's the Canadian benchmarks. But I mean, you may decide to have any other heart. Yeah, but ideally, if you have a model like this, you achieve systemic coherence and transparency, you establish the basis for principled comparison, and you can monitor for purpose of quality assurance. But only if you also take into consideration context. Context is key, and the context is situated in a specific educational and social background. In your case, universities. In my case, adult learners of foreign languages. Primary, secondary, different contexts, different needs, different ways of understanding this triangle, but with the same heart. But also, when we think of the heart, we need to think of the learner. The learner should be at the heart, and it's actually related to the context. The main element in everything we do is the learner. It's not society, it is society, but only if the learner is taken into proper consideration. So I'll now describe very briefly the handbook. This is the name in English. If you want to check it on any website, if you write this, you'll be able to download it. We have a different approach made possible. You may either have a system and relate it to the CFR, that would be bottom-up, or you may have to develop a new system, and then you have top-down, CFR down. Different stakeholders may want different things. That's why our handbook has different approaches. There's stage 1, stage 2, introductory, professional. And the key stages are familiarization, specification, standardization, standard setting, validation. I'll give you 2 minutes to read. Am I doing fine? Okay. And you can summarize these 5 stages into actually 4. Knowledge building, knowing what you're doing, analysis, deciding where you want to go, making decisions on what is best for you. We've put together standardization and standard setting, because standard setting is a procedure which is very, very linked to high stakes tests. You may want to do standard setting exercises or benchmarking exercises with curriculum objectives, but we talk about standardization in these contexts. And quality assurance, which is the validation, reporting, writing down what you've done, why you've done it. And then there's some advice, notes for implementation. If you're working on your own, I didn't mention this, the handbook is fully aware of the fact that a lot of people work in groups, in departments, but there's a lot of freelancers in the world. And the freelancers in the world are the ones who very often write our items, the items that we're going to use, and write the textbooks that we're going to use. So we wanted to reach the freelancers who were not able to attend certain trainings or could not afford that because of financial issues or because of time. So we decided that this handbook could be completed to quite a good extent individually, at home, online. So there's some advice here. Remember that you are the best judge of what is and what is not possible or realistic. For this reason, we strongly encourage you to tailor what you do to your specific context, avoid being tempted to do too much, surprise, surprise, and being tempted to estimate what you need to do. And at the end of each of the chapters, we have that reminder, which is something that we missed in the companion volume. The framed questions at the end of the chapters or at the end of the relevant sections that we had in the Common European Framework in 2001. And then we have the linking forms. As you proceed, you complete these forms, which are, in fact, customizable. You have, if you access the document, you have two files in the EALTA website. The book, which is PDF, and then the Word documents. These documents are in the handbook, but they're also separate as a file, which is Word, so that you can change things. But it's an easy way of controlling what you're doing, and it's not as demanding as write a report. Depending on the context where you work, you may not want or need or have to or want to write a report. So a collection of forms that show what you've been doing, we thought would be useful. So that's the end of the process, and I wanted to describe, and you may think that it's complex, but it's rather straightforward within its complexity. There's a number of steps, and you get as far as you can or as you want to. And before getting started, I would recommend that you ask yourself the following question. Why are you doing it? What's the real why behind this? To show that you've done it? Who is in charge and who will be in charge? That's key. But then, which champions or leaders, supporters? I mean, in CLES, you know that one person is not enough. You need your champions, those who will go to their centers and argue their case, which is your case, which should be everybody's case. And with which resources? That was a question from the director, for the Director General. How? And which timeline? Be modest. Yeah? And then things are changing so fast that looks like we need to always include in any project that we have artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can give us ideas, can give us topics, can give us items, can give us texts. Artificial intelligence is the be-all and end-all. It is very helpful as a colleague. Yeah? And I've done some research recently, and I'm going to report. I've done some research with students of mine using artificial intelligence in developing, in selecting texts and developing, creating texts and developing items. And I just want you to remind you of a couple of colleagues, Olena Rossi and Pep Moncada, who've been working with texts and reading items and comparing the judgments that artificial intelligence does with the judgments that item writers does. And using their chat GPT-4, they realized that higher order objectives are not that well rendered in artificial intelligence productions. It's getting better because we are making it better. So it's getting better, but you don't always have to trust it. But I'm not going to deal with this because I don't know much about it. And there's 3 sessions in this Congress about this. So the only reminder I would like to make is that instead of thinking that artificial intelligence will make us forget about the group of item writers or item constructors or item editors or exam developers is not true. We need to have a view of something like this. Yeah. And last but not least, I would also like to take into consideration in this sort of process, apart from using digital resources and artificial intelligence as much as possible, to think of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the curriculum and in the assessment. And I've added this link. It's a group of Scottish people, well, the Scottish Board, it's the Scottish Board of Education that has produced this, which is, I think, an interesting frame and very easy to use, but I don't agree with their using equality, because we should not be talking about equality. Nobody is equal. Equality is a contradiction with diversity. It's equity. Equity is not the same as equality. So that's something. And there's another article that was published in Language Assessment Quarterly by Linda Taylor, which is also interesting because it talks about social justice. One of the issues that we're going to include in a supplement that we're producing for the handbook, social justice. And I think that this is something we should take into consideration. For you to remember this all the time, think of adding justice to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And what do you have when you have JEDI? Jedi. So think of Jedi and artificial intelligence. So, conclusions, final thoughts, and a way forward. Please remember that whenever we adopt something, we adapt it, Le Petit Prince. You have to apprivoiser les animaux là. So adoption means adaptation, and alignment is a process of going from adoption to adaptation and back. And please remember that you need to align all this. And implementing a comprehensive learning system implies respecting this. And some recommendations for me would be consider the lessons learned from the implementation of the CFR 2001. Do not only focus on assessment, think of teaching and learning. There's a movement now by Enrica Picardo and Brian North going to the action-oriented approach. In the 2001, the action-oriented approach was a way of looking at language and how it is learned and why it should be learned in a language-oriented approach. Whereas now the language-oriented approach encompasses also methodology, task development, etc. So call it what you want, but think of learning, teaching, and assessment as a unit, and careful with what you claim. Yeah. Then alignment is multidimensional and developmental. It's not, I've done it, finished. Context-based, focused, step-by-step approach. Read, select, plan, act, document, disseminate, monitor, document, and back. Yeah? Use digital resources as much as possible. Take gender into consideration, and very important, involve everybody and combine bottom-up and up and top-down approaches. So, I'm almost done. The handbook people, we're still working. We are moved, the veterans are moving towards, younger people. We've already got our inheritors. But we're still working on a brief supplement to include in the handbook that is existing as such the issues that have been raised in recent conferences where people shared what they've been doing with the handbook in these 2 years. And in our work, we're actually working on making it even more graphic to illustrate even in a clearer way what we mean by the importance of context, of learners, and the different models. We talk about the language model, the development model, and the measurement model. Yeah? So we're working on this, and this is another of the graphs that we're working on, but careful, because test alignment, you see, I'm not going to tell you who did this, but test is test, no, assessment. Yeah? So, in this process, I'm just going to conclude that what we've been talking about is about the why we do something, the importance of knowing what we're working with, how we're working with that, and how well we have worked with that. And this means that we need to know where we're going. And I don't know if you've seen this film. Have you seen The Brutalist? The Brutalist is a long film that was released last year. And I was tempted not to go, but I went. And, well, for once, there's a break in the middle of the film, yeah? So I went to see it, and I was shocked at the very end of the film when they say it's the destination, not the journey. And I thought, oh my God. I always thought it was the opposite, because we keep talking the process, not the outcome. The process, yes, but if you don't know where you're going, you're in trouble. So that's the explanation. I checked it. And then while you're enduring a journey, there's a lot of sacrifice needed for an artist to leave behind their work. Therefore, there's validity in the destination having importance. So I'll stop here. Here's the references. I can give the presentation to whoever wants to have it and PDF it. And merci de votre attention. Et si vous avez des questions, je suis prête à y répondre.
Merci beaucoup pour cette conférence passionnante qui nous remet un peu dans le... Voilà. On est beaucoup dans évaluation, mais effectivement, on est bien dans enseigner, apprendre, évaluer, certifier, etc. Alors, nous avons commencé en retard, donc on va prendre des questions jusqu'à 45. Donc, on a 10 minutes de questions. Et puis ensuite, il y aura la pause café, vous pourrez continuer. Alors, on vous donne la parole.
Est-ce qu'il y a des questions ?
On peut parler pendant le café.
Merci beaucoup pour votre passionnante communication et votre passionnant plaidoyer pour l'alignement et le standard setting, qui m'est allé vraiment droit au cœur parce que c'est une cause qui est très importante pour moi. Et j'ai quand même une question technique. Dans quelle mesure faut-il être compétent en statistiques pour faire ce travail d'alignement ? Quelles sont les statistiques minimales qui sont vraiment nécessaires ?
Bon, on dit dans le handbook qu'on peut faire les 3 premières. Bon, si vous avez la familiarisation, les spécifications et la standardisation, vous n'avez pas besoin d'être un maître statisticien. Si vous voulez vous engager au standard setting, on vous dit déjà qu'on peut prendre un petit manuel pour avoir the basic statistics you can do with an Excel sheet. and Julia has given courses on that. So it depends on how far you want to go. Et ça dépend aussi du numéro de personnes que vous avez. Tout le monde parle avec le RH et item response theory et tout ça. Mais d'abord, je crois que la statistique, je suis en train de lire des documents préparés par une personne qui travaille aux Pays-Bas, qui parle que souvent, data prevents us from seeing the landscape. So, and data is important, mais je crois que c'est pas crucial de être. Je sais pas, je suis pas très bonne dans la statistique. Je sais les lire et je peux travailler avec un statisticien et lui dire, je voudrais savoir ça, parce que je ne réussis pas à le savoir. Mais je crois que ce n'est pas crucial. Laurent.
Merci beaucoup, Neus, pour cette présentation tellement claire et agréable, vraiment. Ça fait plaisir d'entendre des choses qu'on a envie d'entendre, tout simplement. Pour cette histoire de statistiques et bien sûr de standard setting, c'était juste une information pour dire que le CLES est véritablement engagé dans une perspective d'alignement plus que de standard setting européen, dirigé par Julia Sabala, ici présente. On a eu cette première session avec toi à Valencia. On a fait donc 2 compétences et à partir de lundi, on réattaque à Göttingen avec 2 autres compétences, alignement européen du CLES sur les certifications que sont donc à CLES pour l'Espagne, CERMO pour la Pologne, évidemment Unicert pour l'Allemagne. Donc le processus est en cours et on est en train de regarder ça. Tout à fait d'accord aussi avec l'idée que ce n'est pas parce qu'on a des données qu'on a des résultats et que des milliers de statistiques, etc., ne font jamais une conclusion scientifique. Il faut aller derrière pour voir ce qu'il y a véritablement, ce que ça veut dire, et évidemment regarder le paysage et pas la tonne de chiffres qu'on peut avoir. Ça, c'est une réalité tellement importante. Merci.
Ensuite, on a encore le temps pour une dernière question. Je serai là toute la journée. Hein.
J'ai peut-être une question qui est plus générale. J'aimais bien le slide qui disait « Tailor what you do, avoid being tempted to do too much ». En tant qu'enseignant, je comprends ça. Mais est-ce que vous pourriez donner un exemple concret de « Don't underestimate what you do ».
Did it say don't underestimate what you do or what is necessary or what you want to do? Maybe
oui, peut-être j'ai mal écrit.
Maybe it's wrong.
Non.
Thank you for picking up.
Ouais.
Ah.
Oui, et le dernier, to underestimate what you need to do. Oui. Est-ce que vous pouvez clarifier un peu ça?
Par exemple, la question d'avant, si vous voulez vous engager au standard setting, vous devez être bien capable de voir ce que ça veut dire. Par exemple, Laurent nous a donné un exemple. Le réseau NULT a décidé de faire une première approximation à la standardisation et le benchmarking des différents examens. Alors, ils ne vont pas aller trop loin parce qu'ils sachent qu'il n'y a pas assez d'informations pour le faire, mais ça sera mieux que ce qu'on avait avant. Alors, il faut d'abord, et ça c'est connecté au read, think, decide. Sinon, c'est trop compliqué. Et c'est toujours possible de s'arrêter. On a commencé à parler comme ça quand on a développé le manuel pour relier les examens au niveau du cadre. Si vous avez fait la familiarisation et la spécification, je suis sûre 100% que vous allez modifier vos examens, vos matériaux, tout. Parce que si vous essayez de réfléchir d'une façon systématique, c'est toujours mieux ce que vous avez que ce que vous aviez. Alors, don't do too much. Take it easy. Parce que les professeurs ont la tendance de... A question I always ask my student teachers is, before you go into the classroom, think, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Don't tell me it's motivating or they're going to like it. Yes, but what do you want them to learn? So that's the idea. Okay.
J'ai une toute dernière question.
Je propose qu'on va devoir s'arrêter.
Il y a une dernière question.
Pas difficile, hein?
Neus, en fait, merci beaucoup. C'est vraiment très intéressant et surtout le fait que tu relis l'évaluation à l'enseignement et au learner, ça c'est vraiment très important. Ma question, c'est sur la terminologie. Parce que j'ai cru, tu as dit à un moment que test, c'était pas assessment, testing, c'est pas assessment, c'est deux termes distincts. Et en fait, moi j'avais quand même l'idée que le fait d'aligner sur un référentiel de compétences, c'était quand même du testing. C'est-à-dire que même si ce n'est pas calibré, étalonné, standardisé avec des statistiques, comme tu disais, qu'on était quand même dans le domaine du testing parce qu'il y a un référentiel de compétences et qu'on aligne avec une démarche scientifique, etc. Donc, pour toi, ce n'est pas du testing.
Le problème ici, c'est que parler d'évaluation ou de tests, c'est toujours très dangereux. Et une des choses que Dylan Williams says is when we started thinking about assessment for learning in the 1970s, we made a mistake and we called it assessment, and that got it wrong. The minute, I insist on talking about assessment because even if you in the classroom do an exercise that gives you information on how far your students have learned something, I wouldn't call this testing. No, I know. But you wouldn't call it testing, but you would have to have your construct here. You would have to have your standards here. You need to understand the what of the learning and the teaching. And if you have a clear idea of the what, the assessment, which includes testing, should be aligned to this. Maybe we talk about the same thing and label it in a different way. And testing is a very loaded word. Testing, people think that testing equals multiple choice. And that's a problem. Thank you for the question.